My cat wasn't an Everton fan, just in case you're wondering. Before I start, I just want to apologise for the delay in this video. I had a few problems with my hard drive, which effectively meant that I've had to make some of this video twice. If you could like and subscribe, that would be a massive help. And if you wanted to go over to my Patreon as well, chuck me a few dollars, you get to see the version of this video without all the changes that I've had to make to get around all the YouTube copyright bollocks and all of that. I also want to give a shout out to this book here, Fear and Loathing at Goodison Park, Everton under David Moyes by Lou Reed Foster. Very good book, very good read, and it was a big source of research for this video. Anyway, on with the video.
Today, this is the start. It's a trite expression and I hate it, but this is the start of it. This is a new beginning for Everton. We got a terrific manager. He knows what he wants for the club.
I can't remember anything Mike Walker ever said. Anything round that game. I can't remember anything at half time. So I can't remember any other tactics that we used there to to go all out for it. That result was done by the players and the fans as a combination. It was nothing to do with the management.
Premier League safety had given Mike Walker a stay of execution, but his head was still very much on the chopping block. As the 1993-94 season had progressed, he had firmly lost the dressing room.
Wasn't Mike Walker the manager of Everton?
Yeah. Well, he was. Mike Walker was ostensibly in charge of a football team. Yeah, I mean,
right. Okay. Wow.
He was doing all these training sessions and that. I was so bored. I really was bored and that. Anyway, he called me in, the manager, and he said, "What's the matter?" He said, "You look bored with the sessions." I said, "I am bored." I said, "I've done that when I was 13.
Nicknamed the Silver Fox, he was like a prototype parts. He had the reputation of a bit of an egotist, a bit of a poser. He would be mocked for his suits, suntanning in Speedos, and having his initials painted on his parking space. Something even his predecessors never did, no matter how long they're in the job or how many trophies they'd won.
And I thought, he had an ego, you see, and it was always too, the club was too big for him. He was never there. He was always there at the end of training. Never used to come and watch the training. So, to me, it was a manager that I couldn't relate to. And so I pulled a card in this day, and I seen MW, and I thought, fuck that, that's for me, innit? It's my initials, yeah. All the lads are going, "You won't leave it there." I went, "I fucking will." I said, by the time I finished training, he'll be just coming in so we can share this, share this car space. So, anyway, he comes in early. He must be looking for his MW on the floor. Anyway, I get summoned off the training ground. So I'm up in his office, and he sat opposite, and he goes, "You've got a terrible attitude, you son." I said, "You're a terrible fucking manager."
He also came under criticism for not spending a lot of time at the training ground with the team, with Neville Southall even joking about this in front of him and the team.
I suppose we had a dodgy manager, really. He got us in that position, so we shouldn't have been in that position anyway. But
Mike Walker?
Yeah, Mike Walker, I wouldn't let him manage my bath.
He lost the dressing room with our star players because we never get the feedback from him, I always say this, we went to Blackburn and we lost 5-0. Yeah. And you couldn't see our manager Mike Walker Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday after that game. And we thought, with a manager, you win with the team and you lose with the team.
It wasn't just his commitment that was being questioned, but also his ability, as he seemed determined to play the same style of football that he had played at Norwich, regardless of whether he had the squad best suited to it. However, for the time being, he was Everton's manager, and they had another chance to right the club's fortunes in the top flight of English football. Now more than ever, the squad really needed to get their head down for an intensive boot camp style pre-season to bring themselves up to speed and make sure they were never again in that situation. Well, about those pre-season preparations. Everton had not one but 3 pre-season tours that summer, in Germany for 9 days, in Sweden for 7 days, and in Italy for 3 days. On those tours, there on the sesh, staying out late, eating pizza, eating bratwurst. It was badly organised and it sounded fucking epic, but probably not the best preparations for the upcoming season. To add to all that chaos, Neville Southall threatened to go out for a pre-match warm-up bare bollock naked if his kit didn't arrive. I mean, his moustache would have probably covered up most things anyway. On the financial front, Everton also weren't exactly where they wanted to be. At the time, the football club's revenue was largely tied to their gate receipts, and they were dropping to record lows. In the 93-94 season, the $5 million Everton made from Goodison was almost half of the $9 million that Liverpool made from Anfield. One home game in the 1993-94 season against Southampton attracted under 14,000 fans, a 10-year low at Goodison Park. On the positive side though, they signed midfielder Vinnie Samways for $2.2 million. They did fail to get Jurgen Klinsmann, but still, most of the foreign players were fatigued by the World Cup. However, Everton's squad had mostly English players, so they were fine. Cheers, Graham. So the season might go okay. The 94-95 campaign started with a 2-2 draw against Aston Villa. Pretty decent, but after that, things would get a lot worse. They would lose their next 4 games in a row. To add to their woes, the deal to get World Cup winner Müller had fallen through at the last minute. New signing Daniel Amokachi did score in a 2-2 draw, which was followed by another draw, but then Everton endured 4 more league defeats in a row, as well as an early exit of the League Cup to second tier Portsmouth. And worse than all of that, they changed the Z-Cars theme to Fanfare for the Common Man. What are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, that last one had nothing to do with Walker, but still, what a piss take. They did pick up a little undefeated run, drawing 2 games and beating Arsenal. However, it was too little, too late. And on the 8th of November, with Everton bottom of the table, their worst start to a league campaign ever, 1 win in 16 games in all competitions, and 6 wins in total since Mike Walker had taken over, the worst record of any post-war Everton manager, the Silver Fox was hounded out of Goodison.
Maybe I should have just put a bit more of my own input into it rather than let the coaches do it, you know. Not to say the coaches did what they want, so, you know, I'm not blaming them, but I'm saying that, yes, I could have maybe put a bit more in.
A bit more hands-on.
And it might have been a bit different.
When looking for a replacement, Everton once again reverted to their tactics of placing trust in a familiar face, as they went for the club legend who scored over 100 goals for them, the man most thought they should have gone for instead of Mike Walker. It's Joe Royle, or Joe Quarter-Pounder to our American viewers. Since retiring from playing, he'd spent 12 years managing Oldham, getting them promoted to the top flight, getting them to a League Cup final, the most important cup, and 2 FA Cup semi-finals, both times being beaten by Manchester United, because they can't let anyone else have any fun. Joe Royle also kept Oldham in the Premier League, and the next season he did take them down, but Everton needed a manager with relegation battle experience, so he was in. His impact was immediate. Straight away, he won the respect of all of the players, who were willing to run through brick walls for him. He recalled Joe Parkinson, John Ebrell and Andy Hinchcliffe to the first team from Everton reserves. He focused on making the team tougher. He was going to make them dogs of war. birds of war had already been taken, I imagine. They would need to be tough, as their first game couldn't be any tougher, the Merseyside derby. To add a further setback, Duncan Ferguson had been done for drink driving, waking up in a prison cell the day before the game.
Got let out at, I don't know, 10 in the morning or something.
This is the Sunday before the Monday game?
Sunday, aye. Big
For the derby on the Monday?
Yeah, bear in mind I've not met the manager. And I says to Big Joe, I said, I made a mistake here. He says, just another one, I said, well, you're young. He says, you're young.
Is that what he said?
He says, you're young. He said, but don't do it again. You shouldn't be doing that. I said, no, I know. He says, can you play? I said, you're fucking right, I can play. I need to play.
And you know what? They won 2-0. They would go on to win the next 2 games, draw the following 2, all the while keeping clean sheets. He got Duncan Ferguson, who was on loan from Rangers, firing in goals. During his time, he fell in love with the club and would make his signing permanent. He also may or may not have been fleeing Scotland to escape the law, because of course he was. Unlike Mike Walker, Joe Royle undoubtedly had the respect of the players.
With Joe, everybody felt comfortable.
Yeah.
He was number 9 playing for Everton. He knew the club, and he was a hell of a psychologist.
We went into the gym, and when he done it, he said, "This is how we're going to do it. And if there's anyone here that doesn't want to do it, off you go." And obviously, no one did. But it was just work right, and organisation. Everyone understanding this is your job. No more right now. This is what we need, and we worked on it. And if you were coming to watch training, you go, Jesus, I'd hate to watch that. I hate to be involved in that every day. But it was what was needed.
To be fair, when Joe Royle came in, he just took us out on the pitch and went, look, see, there's another half to the pitch. We'll just play in that one. And to be fair, none of us had been over the halfway line for half a season anyway. So,
he knew that he wanted to kick Barry Horn and Joe Parkinson's butt. I was a player who needed a hug.
Okay.
If I got a hug from the manager, I was unstoppable. So that's different psychology, and he knew what to do.
Everton would flirt with relegation again for much of the season, but ultimately Joe Royle took them to 15th. And he also brought back the Z-Cars theme as the stadium music. Nice one, geezer. However, the highlight of the season has to be the FA Cup. They beat 2nd Division Derby County and Bristol City in the early rounds before smashing Norwich City 5-0. Then beating the mighty Newcastle United in the quarter-finals before taking apart Tottenham Hotspur, setting up a date with Manchester United in the final. And this was prime Sir Alex, Manchester United. And when the cup final day came, Everton won.
Right out in the middle, still Jackson, and Stewart! It's there, right up!
Sometimes the dark clouds come and drive the sun away. Sometimes it's cold outside, but the room don't always stay. Somehow you bring me new sunshine and make my life a brand new day. Well, baby, you make my life a sunny day. You make my life a sunny day. You make my life a sunny day.
Joe Royle had taken the club from bottom of the league to FA Cup champions in a matter of months. And perhaps better than all of that, their FA Cup final song was actually decent. Don't look up any of our FA Cup final songs, by the way. Don't do that. There's no need. Winning the FA Cup meant a long overdue return to Europe. In the summer, things got even better, signing Craig Short and Andrei Kanchelskis. The season saw them pick up the Community Shield and finish 6th, only getting pipped to a UEFA Cup spot by Arsenal on the last day. That season happened to be when UEFA took away a European spot for English clubs, so Everton again got a bit shafted in regards to European qualification. But what can you do? Everton would get knocked out of the Cup Winners' Cup in the second round and miss Duncan Ferguson for 3 months during the season due to a prison sentence. Which, you know, it's Duncan Ferguson, it's to be expected. But still, despite all of that, they had a great season. And they built upon that success in the summer by signing players like Gary Speed and Nick Barmby. Things looked to be getting better and better for Everton. Since Peter Johnson had become chairman 2 years previously, they had spent 27 million net on new players, which was more than the likes of Newcastle United's 23 million, Arsenal's 21 million and Liverpool's 20 million. Everton had also launched a magazine called The Evertonian. The first Everton megastore had opened. They'd refurbished Prince Rupert's Tower and introduced the Everton Video magazine, whatever the fuck a video magazine is. Peter Johnson was so committed to the club, he was even introducing made up things. So fans had reason to be excited when in 1996 Peter Johnson would increase his shareholdings to 68%, making him the majority shareholder in the club. Despite a few bits of bad PR, such as issuing season tickets with red covers, Dixie the mascot, losing out on Stan Collymore to Liverpool, and a proposed move away from Goodison, which would start to be mentioned in October, despite all of that, the job Peter Johnson was doing as Everton chairman seemed to be pretty good. However, the same couldn't be said for the job he was doing in his other business dealings. Because in 1996, his company Park Foods Limited launched a new product called DJ Spuddles, and it did not go well.
If anyone ever happens what one of the worst signings of the fucking 90s was for Everton, DJ fucking Spuddles.
This will become relevant in a little bit. Another calamity that took place in 1996 was the transfer blunder of Nigel Martyn. By 1996, Neville Southall was 37 years of age and 37 stones of weight by the look of him, and Joe Royle was looking towards a future without him. I mean, not meaning he's going to die, you know, they were going to move him on. So when one of the best goalkeepers in the country, Nigel Martyn, had expressed his intent to sign for Everton, all Joe Royle's Christmases had seemed to have come at once. Nigel Martyn came to Park Foods headquarters to do the deal. However, Joe Royle was away with his wife, who was ill at the time. Peter Johnson was away on business, leaving a less experienced member of the staff to conduct the deal.
So we got there and we pulled in and he came out and shook hands and everything. And my agent said, look, before we say anything, Leeds have matched the bid. So I think it's in Nigel's best interest to speak to them as well. So he was like, oh okay, well, come in. So we came in and he said, well, I thought, you know, you were coming to sign. And we were like, well, that's what we thought as well. But, you know, this has happened. So he said, oh okay, let me go and make a call. So he went out the room and he made a call and he came back in and he said, well, we've got a press conference organised for tomorrow and it's, you know, it's all meant to be going ahead. So my agent just said, look, Nigel's going to go and talk to Leeds, but his preferred destination is here. My wife's uncle was living in the area, so like at least we had somebody we could, you know, be near. So
and all you're happy with the contract and everything at Everton?
Yeah. You know what had been discussed. Obviously, the contract itself never got put in front of me, but what we discussed and everything. He then went out the room and made another call, and then he came back in. He said, "Well, if you're going to go," he said, "you want to get a move on because we've got to go. You've got to get through the Mersey Tunnel and pick up signs for the M62 if you want to get across to Leeds because it's going to get really busy soon." So he basically
give you directions. Fucking head it up then if you're going to go.
So we
he could have stalled you and you could go there in time.
It was strange.
I'll give you £2 for a tunnel.
And when he turned up, Leeds actually made him feel wanted.
Joe Royle must have been pulling his hair out.
he wasn't happy.
Because if he's there, he's not there, and rightly so. But if he was there, there's no way
he wouldn't have let it happen. No.
Yeah.
He's a real football man, isn't he? And he wouldn't have let it happen.
He would have understood the implications if you went through that door.
Yeah, he would have known as soon as I went out there, Leeds wouldn't have wanted me to come back, so they'll be doing everything they can. I
laughed at the roundabout right now. Yeah, just don't let him 62 you're in Leeds, mate. Off you pop. Take a sandwich and a drink.
Everton had just let one of the best keepers in the country slip through their hands, pun intended. A year later, they would repeat this mistake with Mark Schwarzer. This did not speak favourably of the state of Everton's organisation and the infrastructure of the club.
Well, this is how Everton was running in the 90s. That was him, and then Mark Schwarzer came. The same fucking deal. Mark Schwarzer came, Johnson not there, Cliff Finch, right, we want you to sign. Schwarzer's like, okay, this is what I want. And Cliff Finch was like, listen mate, you should be wanting to crawl over broken bottles to play for Everton Football Club. And Schwarzer went, Middlesbrough want me, see ya, and fucking went to Borough.
And I just put it down to just having just shit people in the back room with no negotiations. There's no like a winning mentality. We've always had that like loser mentality since probably the 90s, to be honest. That sort of mid-90s.
However, Everton still had reason for optimism. They were even an outside shout for the title. And for the first half of the season, they actually did pretty well. The new signings clicked, they had a balanced team where the goals were spread out. As Henry Winter wrote, they added craft to hard graft. Ferguson was free scoring and a free man, didn't get convicted once all season, which definitely helps. Also, Neville Southall was still great, and Everton had got themselves to 6th by mid-December, picking up results against Newcastle United and Manchester United along the way. It would be in December where Everton would suffer injuries and suspensions to key players, a problem that Everton didn't have the squad depth to deal with, which saw them go on a 6-game losing streak. And then you have to add in the financial ramifications of Park Foods' bad investment, which affected Everton as the club set about going on a selling spree and couldn't replace the players they were losing with players of a similar quality fast enough.
DJ fucking Spuddles, you fucking cunt.
As 1997 progressed, Everton slid down the table, but as transfer deadline day loomed, Joe Royle had some signings lined up to try and fire them back up the table. And they were Barry Horn, Klaas Eftervag. It doesn't really matter, he was just part of the deal for this third name, which was Toure Andre Flo. However, Peter Johnson was less keen to sanction the deals. Now, stories differ as to the exact reason Joe Royle left the club, some accounts list not getting Toure Andre Flo in particular as the reason for him leaving. Now, there's another account that, if true, really points to another level of boardroom incompetence.
And so Joe was having frustrations in the transfer market with Johnson. And he went across the day he went. I'd seen him at Goodison that morning, and they were announcing an Umbro Cup competition for the following season's pre-season with Chelsea, Ajax and Newcastle. And Joe had been there, he winked at me during the end of the press conference, walked out, and everything was absolutely fine. What we didn't know, he was then going over to Park Foods to meet Peter Johnson. And Desmond Pitcher, one of the deputy chairman, I think he was, had been speaking to Peter earlier in the day. And I said this, oh, hello, I believe he's seeing Joe later. I believe he's coming over to offer his resignation. No one knows why Desmond Pitcher said that. But Johnson is in his office, because Joe certainly wasn't. Joe walks in, and Peter Johnson's opening gambit was, oh, hello, Joe. I believe you're coming to offer my resignation. Now, talk about putting the man off his guard. So Joe's like, no, where'd you get that from? You don't want me to, do you? And the pair of them basically started having this conversation where it quickly became clear that Joe didn't have the total confidence of Peter Johnson. And in about the space of about an hour and a half, they agreed that he was going to leave the club and be mutually consented. Now, the big dynamic is that Cliff Finch, who was Peter Johnson's right-hand man, was away at the time. I think he was in the Caribbean or something. And Peter subsequently said, Joe subsequently said, if Clifford had been there, you'd have just said to the pair of them, what are you doing? Behave yourselves, knock their heads together and just, let's go on with things. We've had a bad run, let's just go on with things. But they didn't. Joe was listening to Desmond Pitcher, listening to some of the things that are being written in the media, and thought it was a good idea to make this change. So a man who transformed the football club in the space of, 2.5 years, and had admittedly a 2.5-month rocky spell, was suddenly the former Everton manager. It was absolute madness, it really was.
I really hope that story is true, it'd be so funny. Everton were 13th and only 6 points above the relegation zone. So Joe Royle might have been sacked anyway, who knows. Whatever the reason, on the 27th of March, Joe Royle and Everton mutually parted company.
I went to see him, we got on great. He's a really nice fella. I thought he was a good chairman as well. I couldn't understand what it was, but he said I've been talking with one or two of the other board, and we know the press feeling at the time. The press, for whatever reason, had jumped on my back. Mm-hmm. Sorry about your paper, your paper especially.
Yeah,
and quite honestly, it just fizzled away.
Why would you not back somebody who's bought you silverware? Yeah, who's bought you a sixth place finish? Yeah. We're flying in the league as well and playing some really attractive football. Why would you not back a guy?
With only 7 games left to go, Everton needed a new manager. And that task was given to defender and club captain Dave Watson. What I like to imagine happened is Peter Johnson looked around the dressing room and said, "Who wants it, geezers?" But, I wasn't there.
If as I said, I said no, I wouldn't have had a job, you know what I mean? So without thinking, I just said, I'd love to, love to become the manager and that, and then put the phone down. I thought, because I didn't even know what the remaining fixtures were, and I got the fixtures, and I thought, get the hell.
Yeah.
Hey.
Dave Watson, he did a good enough job. Helped by the stepping up of some young players like Richard Dunn, they managed to get 6 points, and he took Everton up to 15th. Thank fuck for points deductions, am I right, geezers? On the last day of the season, the crowd erupted into chants of "We want Johnson out." The chairman was very unpopular with the supporters. Or everyone might have just misheard them. Maybe they were chanting, "Get your Johnson out." They could have just been horny.
We've been talking about success now for 4 or 5 years, and apart from the FA Cup, we've sort of disappointed a lot of people. So I think it's about time that things did turn around and we started to win things.
Now, Dave Watson was only ever going to be a caretaker manager until the end of the season. They needed to appoint a full-time manager for the 1997-98 season. There were talks of big names, legends of the game, like Johan Cruyff, Bobby Robson, and legends of the club, like Andy Gray, who'd even picked out his backroom staff. But in the end, they said, let's go round again, and got in Howard Kendall. Hope I didn't have to take that song out for copyright. I look like a proper muppet. That summer also saw the club bring in some new additions, the most notable being Slavan Bilic, whose deal they'd already agreed on last season. They also got in some promising up-and-comers like John Oster and Gareth Farrelly. However, Everton's season was just depressing. They were in the relegation zone by October, and by the end of November, they were bottom of the table. To make things worse, the home kits weren't the traditional royal blue, and they were printed wrong. I mean, not the worst football shirt faux pas. Look at it long enough, you'll see why. Yeah, it's bad, innit? Fuck me, I never knew Kanye West designed football shirts as well. For Everton's away kits, they simply placed a sticker of the new sponsor 1-to-1 over their previous sponsor, Dankar, which provoked a BBC watchdog investigation. Also, Peter Johnson's Park Food losses were getting worse. DJ Spuddles had cost £11.8 million and had sold only 87,500 in the 6 months leading up to the end of September. Park Food's losses for the first half of the year grew by 19%. This showed itself in Everton's ever-depleted squad, as more players were sold on and replaced with substandard ones. To really stick the knife in, plans were unveiled for a move away from Goodison Park to a location on the outskirts of Liverpool, which, as you can imagine, was hugely unpopular. The hate for Peter Johnson was so high he needed a police escort for their home game against Tottenham at the end of November. That game would be Neville Southall's last match for the club. He didn't get a massive send-off, an on-pitch presentation, a guard of honour, a cake. He probably doesn't need one, but he didn't even get a comb for his moustache. And to make things worse, they'd lost 2-0. Fans even stayed after the match to protest against Peter Johnson.
Arguably they're at their lowest ebb of the 44 years that they've spent consecutively in the top flight. They are, in fact, rock bottom. And all they ask of the chairman is to put up or to sell up. Even though Peter Johnson has departed to the sanctuary of the boardroom deep in the bowels of the main stand at Goodison, there are questions and demonstrations in the stands. They ask where the money has gone, and they shout for the chairman to show his face.
To make things even worse, Gary Speed wanted to leave the club so much he refused to go to West Ham for an away match. Oh, even back then companies were against people working from home. Gary Speed would eventually be sold and branded as a traitor. Hopefully they've forgiven him now. Rest in peace. Come final day, they were once again in serious danger of relegation, needing to better Bolton's result to stay up.
Paul Alcock is the referee. Many times in the past I've seen Goodison bouncing in celebration, but today it's shaking with nerves.
It was worse than 94 for the start because we had a much worse team than 94. We had some good players in 94, but 98, you know, if you have a look at that team, with all due respect, and I mean, there's a couple of really good, like Michael Ball was playing, wasn't he? Really good player, but there's a lot of players there you think I'm not so sure about this. The comments are decent, so panic would be my words I'd use there, Phil.
And it's going to come back to Gareth Farrelly. The shot is on. Oh, and it's in! It's in! It's Gareth Farrelly who sends Howard Kendall into a leap of celebration.
And when the final whistle blew on the final day, Everton managed to just stay up on goal difference as they finished level on points with Bolton. And that may have only been the case due to the fact the ref didn't see Bolton's goal cross the line when they played them away in September. Everton had got lucky. They truly were the team that just would not go down.
Everton are just shaking with nerves. Nobody wants responsibility at the moment. Ball hammers the said ball away. The referee looks across and he's given the final whistle and run off the pitch. And it looks as though Everton have survived. Yes, they have. Everton are staying in the Premiership.
It was a different emotion, I think, in 98 to what it was in 94. 94 was relief, but I think 98 there was anger. It was more anger, wasn't it? I think in 98 rather than 94.
It was a horrible atmosphere, and when the final whistle went, it was instant. We want Johnson out. It was anger. It was nasty.
Deep down, sick the way the season's gone. Mixed emotions at the moment from there. Delighted for the fans and everyone that stayed up. But, you know, you sit and think, you know, we shouldn't have been in this situation. But let's hope we've learned from this season and it's not going to happen again.
In the summer, Howard Kendall was sacked, and it was done in one of the most disrespectful ways, as Peter Johnson was already looking for replacements without telling him while Kendall was away on holiday, leaving Howard to read about all the potential candidates to replace him in the papers. This treatment of a club legend added to the hate that Peter Johnson was getting from the Everton fans. So Everton and Howard Kendall parted way by mutual consent, and Everton had their new manager, Walter Smith, who was a massively successful manager at Rangers, winning a fuckload of trophies. And this was when Scottish football was pretty decent. Walter Smith had retired from football the week prior, but was persuaded to come back to management with promises of a huge transfer budget. However, Peter Johnson's net worth was falling by the second, So what do you do in this scenario? You get yourself into fuckloads of debt. Or to be more accurate, you get your club into fuckloads of debt. As he took out loans to finance a massive spending spree, which included buying John Spencer for 1.5 million, Marco Materazzi for 2.5 million, Olivier Decourt for 4 million, John Collins for 2.5 million, David Unsworth for 3 million, Steve Simonson for 2.3 million when you've bunged on all the add-ons, Ibrahima Bakayoko for 4.5 million. All in all, they spent just shy of 20 million, with more signings believed to be on the way. The money to pay for those signings continued to decrease. Season tickets were 20% below last year's level, with some suggesting that number might be closer to 40%. The season didn't get off to the best start. They got 1 point from their opening 3 games, which saw them back in the relegation zone once again. However, their defence was one of the team's redeeming features, as they went on a run of 10 unbeaten games. However, there was no defence for their attack, not scoring a home goal until the end of October. As you can imagine, with a team who can't score for shit, Everton's form dipped once again, with 3 successive defeats, and Everton's attacking lineup will get significantly worse on the 23rd of November. After a 1-0 victory over Newcastle, Walter Smith, his assistant Archie Knox and their wives were walking down the stairs at Goodison. And that's when they bumped into Duncan Ferguson.
Duncan had been suspended or injured, wasn't playing in that game. And as he passed the manager, he said, "I thought you might have stuck up for me, Gaffer." And Walter, "Stuck up for you? What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, I've signed for Newcastle." "You've what?"
Yeah, this is their story to me. Right? They were going skint, needed a few quid. I was a saleable asset. The banks were closing in seemingly. That was their spiel to me. That was the story.
Did you not believe that?
I did at the time, but you just don't know, do you? As you get older, you get maybe more wiser. Maybe they just wanted me off the books. Maybe they just wanted me gone. But that was the story to me, that the banks were closing in. They got 7 million quid plus another £1 million add-ons, 8 million quid for me. They thought it was a good deal, and it happened very quickly.
But yeah, I'd gone into work the following day, and Tony Story was the acting editor that day. Tony Story was the old business editor of the Echo. And when I told him the story, he refused to believe it. I don't think he could believe that a reputable business could run a business in that fashion. And he says, no, he must have known. The manager must have known. The Echo's editorial policy will be that he knew. So I go down to Belfield to see Walter, and I said, "Look, Walter, I'm awfully sorry, but my gaffer doesn't think that, so you were unaware of it. He thought that you must have known." And I'll tell you what, if Walter didn't know, he's an Oscar-winning actor, because he went ballistic. "You sit there, son. You're not leaving this office till I've got that," I won't use the phrase he used for Peter Johnson, "on the phone. And you've heard him tell you that I didn't know anything about it."
So it turns out the money Peter Johnson promised to Walter Smith wasn't there, and the club needed some money to pay their debts. Therefore, the club captain, the main goal threat, was sold behind the manager's back. To make things worse, even though Ferguson was sold for 8 million, after the 1 million paid to Ferguson as an incentive for him to move, and the sell-on clause they had to pay to Rangers, it only left Everton with 6 million. And that 6 million couldn't even be used to get a replacement, as it had to go straight to the bankers. Even after the deal, the club's overdraft was in excess of 16 million. The whole affair made Walter Smith furious, and he was close to quitting there and then. He issued an ultimatum to the Everton board: either Peter Johnson leaves or he would.
I was under the impression that he was still an Everton player, and obviously I didn't find out until later, in fact after 11 o'clock, that he had been transferred. So that's the situation, and as I say to you, we had a board meeting this morning. Certain things were cleared up, and I'm sure that the chairman will, in his statement, make everything else clear.
I think it's a disgrace. He shouldn't have left the club in the first place. He got pushed out. It's not his fault, it's Johnson's fault, and everyone wants Johnson out.
I've decided I'm not going to go to any more home games. Definitely no away games. I'm a season ticket holder, and I travelled all the way up from London.
Peter Johnson's tricks again. He's ripped the heart out of the club. There's no way any money's going to be put back into the club for new players. That's the most disappointing thing.
What's the point in appointing a manager if the chairman can overrule him?
I followed the chairman into his Rolls Royce
up to Oxton where he lived at the time, and he looked at me and he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, this is bad, Chairman. You know, fans are going crazy. You know, it's not good." And he looked at me and he put his hands to his mouth and he said, "I don't care. I'll be in Jersey in an hour." And that was the last we saw of Peter Johnson.
Peter Johnson would step down as chairman, being replaced by Philip Carter, and a year-long battle for Johnson's 68% of shares in the club ensued.
Make no mistake, Peter Johnson was committed to this club. Make no mistake of that at all. He didn't want to lose out there. He didn't want to bring Everton down. He didn't want relegation. He wanted this club to succeed. And I think he'll be the first to admit that he's failed.
Meanwhile, on the pitch, Everton's season was very inconsistent. They would go on a streak of good results and follow that up with a run of bad results. In February, Watersmith would drop Bakayoko and Kadamare and play Francis Jeffers and Don Hutchinson up front, which really turned the team around and gave them a lot more balance. However, injuries and suspensions exposed a lack of depth in the squad, and they went on a losing run, putting them back in the relegation zone. But then, on deadline day, they signed Kevin Campbell on loan, and his goals helped them climb up the table, capped off with a 6-0 win against West Ham, as Everton would eventually finish the season in 14th. So, could be worse. The summer transfer window saw a raft of exits. Ibrahima Bakayoko, Olivier Decourt, Marco Materazzi, John Oster. Over the season, 26 players were either sold or released. Fuck me, how do you still fill the squad? They got a few players in. They made Kevin Campbell's transfer permanent. They got in Mark Hughes on a free transfer. Anyway, the season, it turned out fine. They finished in 13th. It's a long video, I've got to move on. The biggest news that season was what happened off the pitch. Since the whole Duncan Ferguson saga and the Watersmith ultimatum, Peter Johnson had been looking to sell his shares. Peter Johnson 2 years prior had valued Everton at 70 million. He had since dropped his price down to 50 million. Bill Kenwright had pulled together a consortium of investors which included Paul Gregg, the head of entertainment company SFX, John Woods, a member of the Everton Shareholders Association, and once again the excellently named Arthur Abercrombie. Local businessman Jerry White pulled together a rival bid. Peter Johnson, who was at the time living away in exile due to tax, was holding out for the highest possible price, and the FA wanted Johnson to sell, as he also had a controlling interest in Tranmere Rovers, so Johnson was contravening a whole load of FA rules. Peter Johnson didn't want to sell his shares for less than 29 million, which was 9 million more than Kenwright's offer. However, the geezers Peter Johnson owed money to pressured him to accept any reasonable offer. So to appease them, Peter Johnson gambled and gave the consortium until the 25th of January 2000 to get their offer in, gambling that Peter Johnson wouldn't be able to do so in time. Hopefully he had some kind of counter on a screen that ticked down, proper cinematic. That would have been cool. Kenwright not only had to do his full due diligence, audit the club's finances, check Mike Walker had got his name removed from the car park, but also, most crucially of all, he had to get the finances together, which reportedly he was struggling with. Someone who helped Bill Kenwright in his fundraising pursuits was the Grim Reaper of the High Street himself, Sir Philip Green. Old Phil wrote a letter for Bill to get him £30 million in funding from the Royal Bank of Scotland. Over the years, Philip Green would come to be somewhat of a shadow director of the club, getting involved in audits, player transfers, and at times giving Kenwright advice on an hourly basis. He didn't try and asset strip the club, so really they got away lightly. Nevertheless, time was ticking down towards the deadline, and with just 5 hours to spare, on the 25th of January 2000, Bill Kenwright and his consortium acquired Johnson's 68% shares of the club for 20 million. And finally Everton was back in the hands of an Evertonian, kicking off a new era for the club. A good era? Well, it's complicated. At this point the club was in debt to the tune of £14 million. A plan to help them reduce those debts was to sell 9.9% of the club to American internet company NTL. This was at the time of the dot-com bubble, so media groups such as B-Sky-B, Granada and NTL were massively keen to buy stakes in football clubs in order to get exclusive rights to broadcast football games online. Between September 1999 and September 2000, media groups had bought interests in 10 Premier League clubs, who had received cash injections between the 10 clubs would total £235 million. Everton looked like they had a potential lifeline, one which they needed not only to keep pace with rival Premier League clubs, but one which they may just need to still be a club at all. And confident that the deal was going to go through, Everton again that summer set out on a spending spree, buying Alessandro Pistone for £3 million, Steve Watson for £2.5 million, Nicholas Alexanderson for £2.5 million, Alex Niranko for £4.5 million, Thomas Gravison for £2.5 million, getting Duncan Ferguson back for £3.75 million, Gary Naismith for £1.75 million. Even after selling Don Hutchinson, John Collins and Nick Barmby, when it came to transfers, Everton was still £6 million in the red, which is the last colour Everton want to be in. Everton also got Paul Gascoigne on a free transfer. I mean, it might work out. It didn't, but it was worth a try. The season started out okay. 8 points from 8 games going into October. It's not bad form for a lower mid-table club, which to be fair is what Everton were now. However, off the pitch, things were about to go tremendously bad for the club. Now, since the Nasdaq peaked on the 10th of March, the dot-com bubble burst, as investment in internet companies was getting drier than a female when you start talking about wrestling. By October, the dot-com crash was in full effect. And that is when NTL pulled out of their deal to acquire shares in Everton just 2 hours before the contract was due to be signed. Fuck me, that's bad luck. Not only did the dot-com bubble lead to WCW going out of business, but it's now put Everton back into another financial crisis. Everton were just 2 hours from being debt-free. Now their overdraft was £25 million, edging up to £26.5 million with interest. Everton now had to sell players once again, one being the homegrown talent of Richard Dunn for £3 million to Manchester City. See, dodgy bastards, I'm telling you. The season would not be a good one. The club finally lost their good run of results in Merseyside derbies, which they'd enjoyed in recent years and that I'd conveniently left out till now. They would also lose 3-0 to Peter Johnson's First Division Tranmere Rovers in the FA Cup, and they'd exit the League Cup in the second round. In the league, they were once again in a relegation battle, only securing safety 3 games from the end of the season. Things had gotten so bad that a fan actually tried to trade places with Alex Niarko.
There was then an unwelcome contribution from an Everton supporter who invaded the pitch in a pointed effort to swap shirts and take over from Alex Niarko.
Gaza proved to be a thin shadow of what he once was. Well, I say thin. And to add salt into the wounds, this season would see Liverpool win the treble. Yes, it's a real treble. Oh, that's not a good look. And read off some names: Jamie Carragher, Michael Owen, Steve McManaman, Robbie Fowler, and all of them are in fact Everton supporters growing up. Isn't that painful to see them all play for Liverpool? In the summer, more homegrown talents like Francis Jeffers and Michael Ball were sold.
I got a phone call off a Premier League manager saying, look, we're going to bid for you, we want you. So I want to stay at Everton, you know what I mean? He said, well, I don't really think you've got a say in that. He said, well, they don't want to lose you, but they might have to.
They did manage to get in some signings like Thomas Randzinski and David Ginola. That's got to cheer any fan base up. You probably have to verify your age now. The season once again started with promise. They were actually top of the table after 3 games, but then, right on cue, results dipped. The season wouldn't properly turn to shit until December, which would see them go on a 5-game losing streak, winning only 1 in 13 league games. The fans had long since turned on Smith, who felt he should have been sacked in the summer. The team looked disorganised and demotivated, and the manager looked depressed. The fans certainly must have been. A 3-0 loss to Middlesbrough in the quarter-final of the FA Cup was the final straw, and on the 13th of March, he was sacked. Everton looked for their next manager in the glorious part of the world called Preston. They would end up hiring the relatively unknown young manager of Preston North End, David Moyes. Moyes had been linked with the management jobs at West Ham and Southampton, and he'd been linked for the assistant manager role at Manchester United. Stay away, mate, stay away from that club. However, despite this, him being hired at Everton looked like a bit of a rogue appointment, but it immediately paid off.
I think I'm joining a football club which is probably the people's football club in Liverpool, and the people in the street support Everton, and I hope to give them something over the next few years that they can be very proud of.
I'm sure he had no idea when he called Everton the People's Club what it would mean to Evertonians. But if we needed anything at that time, it was those 3 words.
When he came in, Everton was 16th and only above the relegation zone on goal difference. 9 games and 13 points later, they were 15th and 7 points clear of relegation. The next season would be even better. 11 points from the first 9 games saw Everton in 12th. Not bad. However, the next game would prove to be the toughest test yet of Moyes' reign, as they were playing the double-winning Arsenal. Despite Arsenal taking the lead, Everton had equalised, and by the 80th minute they were still level. And then came on a 16-year-old wearing the number 18, a boy who was Everton's second youngest player, and at that point Everton's youngest ever scorer. And as he gathered the ball, he struck a shot that would make him a man. Wayne Rooney had arrived. Rooney was a revelation. He was the best thing since sliced potatoes. Fuck bread, he was better than that. He would score 8 goals in his debut season, and he would win the BBC's Young Sports Personality of the Year award. And he was just part of a great Everton season, winning 6 games between October to November. They had their best winning streak since the 1986-87 season. They would gain 59 points over the season, finishing in 7th, only just missing out on European football on the last day by a single point. David Moyes' left field appointment seemed to be a masterstroke.
All I'm looking to is to try and start another era at Everton, like Howard Kendall's done in the past and like many other managers have done here, and see if we can bring some glory days back to Goodison.
David Moyes was given a great deal of control over transfers, and Moyes' ability to make great signings for very little money would be one of his most celebrated attributes as a manager. Well, of course, if we're excluding Andy van der Meijden. He had less matches than I do on Tinder.
He spent more time on Breck Road than he did on the pitch. He was extremely injury prone, right? And he barely played, to be honest. So in how many seasons? So he was somehow at us from 2005 to 2009, yeah? And he made 20 appearances. He probably hit up more brothels in one night or over a weekly period than he did in that fucking entire stretch.
In the summer of 2003, Moyes' eye for a transfer would be on full display, bringing in Kevin Kilban for $1 million, James McFadden for $1.25 million, Nigel Martin finally arrived for $500,000, and they got Francis Jeffers back. They got him back on loan, but still, they got him back. Sadly, they couldn't capitalise on that momentum in the following season as they finished 17th, in a very forgettable campaign that was more interesting for what was happening off the pitch. Now, back when Peter Johnson first proposed a move to a new stadium, it never got past the conceptual phase. However, when True Blue Holdings acquired major shares in the club, talk of a new stadium was reignited. They had worked for 2.5 years on a new stadium on the banks of the River Mersey at the King's Dock. Liverpool were trying to become the 2008 European Capital of Culture, and Liverpool had been given £500 million to redevelop the city, and the club had convinced the City Council and the North West Development Trust to help fund a 50,000-seater, state-of-the-art, multi-purpose football stadium with a retractable roof and retractable pitch that could hold gigs as well as football games. The stadium would not only be bigger than Anfield, but it would also be right in the heart of the city centre, giving it much bigger visibility than the stadium of their rivals. The stadium would cost $170 million, and Everton was set to borrow $30 million to pay for their share of the stadium. However, when the deal was getting close, Bill Kenwright had a change of heart, saying he didn't want to take on secondary funding. This greatly angered fellow True Blue Holdings investor Paul Gregg, who in his own words wanted to kill Bill. That would have been a much more underwhelming film. Paul then spoke to the council, who said they'd fund the stadium completely. However, Everton wouldn't have ownership of the stadium, and that was a sticking point for Bill. So in April of 2003, the Liverpool Vision Development ended Everton's plan for a new stadium, instead giving the site to a concert arena.
I felt like we'd been relegated.
Yeah.
Which I think was, everybody's feeling we'd lost. We don't like losing. And the thing was, it would have been a great scheme. It would have sat here in the city centre on the dockside. Everybody would have had to pass it.
Yeah.
Everybody would know that Everton's home was there.
Bill Kenwright and Paul Gregg were not getting on. During the 2003-04 season, they had a falling out over the manager, with Paul wanting to replace him, but Bill wanting to keep him on.
Well, I think, we were desperately short of cash.
Yeah.
Rooney was going.
Yeah.
And I said to Bill, maybe Martin O'Neill might come. I said, I think the fans would like to see him. I think that would increase our season ticket sales. I think who's to say he couldn't persuade Rooney to stay or not? I don't know. But Bill didn't want any of that,
The two would be at loggerheads over the summer of 2004 in what had been described as a civil war, as they disagreed over the direction of the club. Although it wasn't just Paul Gregg who turned against Kenwright, as fans made their feelings loud and clear that they also wanted him out. On the last day of the 03-04 season, a leaflet was dropped around Man City's Eastland Stadium, titled more than one leaflet. It wasn't just one leaflet to go around, they dropped several. On the last day of the 03-04 season, a leaflet was dropped around Man City's Eastland Stadiums, titled Open Letter to Everton Football Club, in which a group of fans posed 10 questions for the board of directors. You know it's got bad when chants aren't enough and fans have to get down the printing shop to protest. But nevertheless, Bill Kenwright did answer the questions, to be fair to him. Didn't do him much good though. With a £40 million debt hanging over the club, Moyes had no money to buy in the transfer market, and talk instead turned to player sales rather than acquisitions, as a raft of players left the club that summer, and not many came in to replace them. However, the transfer that everyone was most concerned with was that of their wonder kid, Wayne Rooney, who the club were publicly adamant they were not going to sell. At the end of May, Trevor Birch was brought in as chief executive to try and sort out Everton's finances. Old Trev had done a similar job at Leeds and Chelsea, where he negotiated the sale to Roman Abramovich, so this seemed like a good move. The club needed to generate new revenue, so when Liverpool were planning a new £84 million stadium, Trevor proposed the idea of a ground share between the two clubs as a potential solution. However, these plans were extinguished on the 16th of July in a statement by Liverpool's chief executive Rick Parry, who told Everton to piss off in regards to a ground share. But you know, he did it in more corporate speak than that. Trevor Birch had also proposed the idea of a club takeover like he'd done at Chelsea, but those plans looked unlikely. Another solution that was proposed by Paul Gregg was that True Blue Holdings should dilute its control of the club in order to attract outside investment, with Gregg lining up investment from Chang Beer, who were brought on as shirt sponsors for the club. Ken Wright was opposed to this, much to Paul Gregg's anger. In July, Arthur Abercrombie, still a great name by the way, resigned from True Blue Holdings. It left the consortium with 3 directors, Gregg, Ken Wright and John Woods. And Woods and Ken Wright sought out to team up and outvote the ideas of Gregg. In addition to this boardroom upheaval, Moyes was reportedly angry at him for not getting funds in to buy new players, in particular a £7 million bid for Alan Smith. By this point the club had lost 15 players that summer, and only been able to bring in Marcus Bent for $450,000. All of this aggro proved to be too much for Birch, who on the 16th of July, just 6 weeks after assuming the role, stepped down from the position of chief executive. Good call, geezer. Sounds almost as stressful as being Bonnie Blue's dry cleaner. The Everton boardroom power struggle resulted in a heated 2-hour board meeting at Goodison Park on the 26th of July, where Gregg gave Ken Wright an ultimatum. He was given 4 days to find the £15 million necessary to match the proposed investment of his rival director, Paul Gregg, in order to continue as chairman of Everton Football Club. However, when the proposed deadline was up, despite talking to 2 potential backers in the interim, Ken Wright couldn't match Gregg's £15 million proposed investment. However, he refused to resign as chairman, as he said Gregg had shown no proof as to where his £15 million was coming from. On the 30th of July, Gregg held a press conference where he said he may have to take legal action to oust Ken Wright as chairman. The two disdained each other so much they were now only communicating via email. This was in the days before WhatsApp. Although Paul Gregg and Bill Ken Wright had started out as friends, both making their money together in the theatre business, the main difference is that Paul Gregg wasn't a football fan. He didn't attend Everton games and seemingly looked upon Everton as just another business proposition. However, Bill Ken Wright was a true Everton till I die football fan who was at every match, and therefore was seen as letting sentiment cloud his business judgment. The £15 million backer was named by Gregg as the Labour peer Lord Grantchester. Oh, another box office name that. However, Lord Grantchester denied these claims. Now, while all this boardroom fuckery had been going on at Everton, Wayne Rooney had been having one hell of a summer holiday in Portugal, scoring 4 goals at the Euros to obliterate any doubts that he was one of the world's next elite talents. Alright, enough of that song now. How many times you have to re-release it? What's going on? After years of letting their promising young talents go, Everton were keen to make sure they didn't let this generational talent leave the club.
We're certainly not selling Wayne Rooney to finance, other players coming into the club or stadium development. That is not an option.
When Rooney signed his first pro contract, he was 17, so was only allowed to sign a maximum of a 3-year deal. That deal was for $13,000 a week. Now he was older, Everton had offered him a 5-year, $50,000 a week deal, the most lucrative in the club's history. However, as the summer progressed towards the 2004-05 season, that contract remained unsigned. And with no takeover incoming, no investment on the horizon, and a debt growing bigger and bigger by the day, Everton looked like they'd have no choice but to sell. On the 25th of August, Wayne Rooney put in a transfer request written on a napkin.
Before the Euro 2004, I knew that I was getting touted to other teams because Everton needed the money.
Yeah.
Certain people, individuals, were going into other clubs saying, would you take Wayne Rooney for 30 million? I was heartbroken, mate. I loved the club and wanted to play for Everton. And once I found that out, and I was just like devastated.
Chelsea were offering the most money, but Rooney didn't want to go to London. He must have been told what the tubes were like. Newcastle also bid for him. However, he wanted to go to Manchester United. And on the 31st of August 2004, Manchester United's £27 million bid for Wayne Rooney was accepted. Everton had found that unicorn that all clubs wish to have. A player coming through their academy with the potential to be the best in the world. However, in the new age of football, increasingly characterised by wealth inequality, they couldn't keep him. A circumstance that had become, and would sadly remain, all too familiar. In addition to Rooney, there are other departures, such as Thomas Randzinski and David Unsworth. Up front, Duncan Ferguson's best days seemed to be behind him, with many saying that on such a hefty contract, he was just a waste of money at this point. I doubt many people would actually have said that to him. What a scary bastard. Do you hear what he did to those people who tried to break into his house? Oh. With the Rooney money having to go towards paying debts, Everton didn't have the most impressive list of new additions. They resorted to signing some Australian geezer from Millwall for £1.5 million. Everton were predicted to go down, and those predictions seemed to be well warranted. In Everton's first game, they got smashed by reigning champions Arsenal. When they went a goal down in their second game to Crystal Palace, this looked like being a dire season. But then... bugger me in the nostril, somehow David Moyes had fashioned one hell of a team. Leon Osman, who came on loan from Derby, turned out to be quality. Duncan Ferguson still had some quality performances left in him. Lee Carsley, he was also brilliant. And that Australian, his name was Tim Cahill, and he was a revelation. How can you punish him for taking his shirt off? He should be rewarded for that, if I was. Defensively, they were solid, which was becoming a hallmark of David Moyes' teams. And up front, they weren't half bad either. In January, they made some great additions, like James Beattie for a club record £6 million, and a 5-month-long loan for the ever-bangable Mikel Arteta. Oh, I'm not partial to the penis, but if I was, I'd let him pull the strings in my midfield anytime. Oh. He was actually convinced to move to Everton by Luis Garcia and Xavi Alonso. You're welcome. Going into the new year, Everton were in the title race. It didn't last long, but never mind. They finally won a Merseyside derby after 5 years. They took 4 points from Newcastle United. They took 4 points from Manchester United. David Moyes won the LMA Manager of the Year award for the second time in 3 years, and Everton had their best ever season in the Premier League, finishing on 61 points in 4th place, which didn't just mean a return to Europe, but to the top table of European football. Play the fucking music. Everton were in the Champions League. Off the pitch, Keith Wyness was appointed as the new chief executive. He would go on to outsource the catering contract to Sodio UX and outsourced the club shops to JJB Sports, turning the £1.5 million loss being made on merchandise to an £80,000 profit. He would also go on to sell the club's old training ground, Belfield, and the Ellen Craven site on Walton Lane in Liverpool, generating income for Everton in the short term so they didn't have to rely so much on player sales, but in the long term, reducing Everton's future revenue streams and assets. In December, Bill Kenwright looked as though he had brought in some new investment, as the Fortress Sports Fund was set to buy a 29.9% stake in the club. However, this time it was Paul Gregg who was asking questions about funding and whether the Brunei Sports Fund had the money that they were saying they had. It was probably just Mickey Pearce again, having a laugh, the bastard.
And I kept saying to Bill, where's the money? Where's the money? You keep selling it, but where is the money? I said, if they're going to do it, they must have money in the bank somewhere. Let them prove it. And then we can, move forward. But I said, until we see the money, we're all wasting our time. Of course, we all wasted our time.
In the end, this deal didn't happen, so the boardroom acrimony continued. The summer saw them make Mikel Arteta's move permanent. They also got in Phil Neville for £3.5 million, who had proved to be a valuable addition to the squad. Finishing in fourth, Everton would be dropped into the third round of qualification to the European Cup, the final round of qualification before the group stages. And who would Everton be playing in their long-awaited return to the European Cup? Villarreal, the third-place La Liga team with Forlan and Riquelme. Not an easy task, but it's doable. Everton would lose the first leg 2-1 at home, meaning that they would need to match that scoreline away from home to take it to extra time. And that one, do you remember away goals? I missed them. I think it was better. Anyway, and at 1-1 in the second leg when Arteta's cross met Duncan Ferguson, it looked like they had done it. But then the ref's whistle blew. In legendary referee Kalina's last match, he had decided to hang up his whistle with some ultimate fuckery, blowing up for a foul committed by Marcus Bent before the corner had even been taken, but still allowing the corner to actually be taken. Now this was at a time where this kind of bollocks didn't happen every day. Everton were rightly outraged.
So we ended up getting beat, didn't we, Lou? And we got beat because of one dickhead's fault. Yeah? Waiting for this bastard, waiting for this ugly, baldy, eye-popping, fish-looking motherfucker named Kalina. Anyone remember that referee's name, Kalina?
Yeah, they got old cunt Lena. With Liverpool's qualification for the Champions League as the previous year's winners, some claimed conspiracy, theorising UEFA didn't want 5 English teams in the Champions League. Now, I personally think this theory is bollocks, as modern times will tell you UEFA love as many English teams in the competition as possible. That being said, the Premier League wasn't as much of a dominant force in world football as it is now, but still, I don't believe this conspiracy. Anyway, Everton would lose the game 2-1, losing 4-2 on aggregate, and after the game, Kalina announced his retirement. I don't blame you, geezer. Get out while you still got the use of your legs. Oh, the loss of a place in the Champions League group stages and the loss of the resulting prize money would serve as another what-if moment for the club. Everton now had to play in the UEFA Cup, but they would also have to qualify for the group stages of that competition, and in qualifying, they were drawn against Dynamo Bucharest. And they got battered. Absolutely destroyed. Their league form was equally shit, losing 7 out of their opening 8 games, putting them bottom of the table by mid-October. The season proved to be disappointing, finishing in 11th and losing Marcus Bent along the way. He didn't die, he just moved to Charlton. a fate worse than death these days. The club also saw the retirement of Nigel Martyn and Duncan Ferguson. And that Farm song got farmed out for another re-release. Alright, we get it, fuck off. That summer saw some good additions to the squad, such as Tim Howard, Jolyon Lescott, and club record signing Andy Johnson. Everton would have a great season, finishing 6th, qualifying for Europe once more, and beating Liverpool 3-0 along the way, as my mate was all too keen to rub in at the time. To add to the good news, in October the club's long boardroom standoff was finally over, because in a deal set up by Philip Green, Paul Gregg sold his 23% stake in the club to BCR Sports, owned by Planet Hollywood owner Robert Earl, which resulted in Sylvester Stallone being invited to watch a game. Yeah, that's nice, isn't it? We got that Tim Cahill celebration as well. Yeah, good times. Paul Gregg would allege the money for the shares came from Green and not Robert Earl, and BCR Sports, the company that held the shares, was registered to the British Virgin Islands using similar complex financial structures that Sir Philip Green had used to avoid paying hundreds of millions of pounds in tax. But whatever, it's not important to this story. I mean, to be fair, with what billionaires are doing these days, I don't sound too bad. The next season for Everton was even better. They made the Tim Howard deal permanent. They signed Phil Jagielka, Leighton Baines, Stephen Pienaar, Yakubu became their new record signing. They signed Manuel Fernandes, and they got a return on loan for Thomas Gravesen. They also had some academy players breaking through, like Jack Rodwell. They finished the season 5th and got to the last 16 of the UEFA Cup along the way, playing some lovely fluid football. And off the field, in October, the new training ground Finch Farm opened. Generally, this was a good time for Everton. Well, I mean, apart from the fact they had a massive set of bollocks running about the place, it was for a good cause though. David Moyes was establishing himself as one of the most promising managers in the game, and Everton were establishing themselves as a dependable top 6 club, capable of beating anyone on their day. However, even in the good times, there was still trouble. December would see an annual general board meeting. You know, where all the club's shareholders can discuss what's going on with the club, often referred to as an AGM. Well, this particular AGM was described as so raucous that the club suspended them for the next 7 years. And that's a long time, believe me, I know. 7 years. Ah. Back on the pitch, things were going great. The next season, they added Louis Saha, Seamus Coleman, and they broke their transfer record for a 3rd consecutive season, signing Marouane Fellaini. They also made David Moyes the highest paid employee in the club's history. Everton would once again have a great season, finishing 5th in the league. And in the FA Cup, they beat Liverpool, although ITV would show an advert during the winning goal. Which I don't think's the worst thing in the world. Nice one there, ITV. And if ITV didn't show it, maybe it didn't even happen. Maybe they should replay that FA Cup. Everton would then beat Middlesbrough, Aston Villa and Manchester United to set up a first cup final in 14 years. And in the final, they would meet Chelsea, in a true David vs Goliath story, where Everton were undoubtedly the underdogs. Everton were now in their 7th full season of David Moyes' tenure. They were one of the most consistent and perhaps the biggest overachieving clubs in the Premier League. However, they had yet to have a trophy to show for it. Now was the chance to turn that potential, that promise, into glory. Now was the chance for David Moyes to take his Everton project to the next level, to end the club's 14-year trophy drought and at long last set Everton on the path to restoring their status as a winning club once again. The 30th of May would be FA Cup final day, and it couldn't have started any better for Everton. However, those celebrations weren't to last long, as Chelsea's quality showed with Didier Drogba equalising in the 21st minute. Everton's job was made that much harder by the absence of Phil Jagielka, Yakubu and Mikel Arteta, and the presence of Tony Hibbert.
Hibbert struggling. He's beaten far too easily here. He's almost jogging.
As the game rumbled on, Everton had their chances, but Chelsea's strength in depth was just too great as Michael Ballack came on to set up Lampard for what proved to be the winner.
Don't let the sun catch you crying. The night's the time for all your tears. Your heart may be broken tonight, but tomorrow in the morning light, don't let the sun catch you crying.
Chelsea won their second FA Cup in 3 years. The next season, they'd retain the title. Unquestionably, David Moyes was a great manager, and this Everton team were a great team. But as they walked the stairs at Wembley to receive their runners-up medals, where almost half of the allocated seats went to hospitality instead of fans, with Sheikh Mansour's takeover of Manchester City happening earlier in the season, we were now in a different era of football. And whereas in the past, a great manager and a great team might have been enough to dethrone the big boys of English football, this was a different time. They might have felt, especially in this footballing landscape, that the team have reached their ceiling.
But don't forget that love's a game, and it can always come again. Oh, don't let the sun catch you crying. Don't let the sun catch you crying, oh no, oh, oh, oh.